The first red flag was not the smug little smirk on the face of the young man sitting across from me. It was the fact that the electronic mail summoned me to the Human Resources office at 7:58 in the morning with no subject line and the word ASAP, typed in capital letters, like a panicked toddler trying to play grown-up. I had not even finished my second cup of coffee when I walked in and saw the kid already perched in my usual chair like he owned the air in the room. Bradley Kingsley, all 28 years of unearned entitlement, squeezed into a slim-fit blazer, and sporting an overpriced haircut, did not even look up when I entered. He just tapped an expensive pen against his teeth like he was waiting for a delivery driver, not about to gut the heart of the company. I stood by the door for a moment observing him. He was the classic example of executive nepotism. A boy who had never worked a day of manual labor in his life, yet felt fully qualified to dismantle a business that had taken decades to build. "Dan," he said, drawing out the vowel like the very sound of my name offended him. "Thanks for coming in early. We will keep this brief." Clara, the human resources representative, sat tight in the corner like she was a hostage. She was gripping a folder tightly in her lap, looking at the carpet, and refusing to make any eye contact with me. That was when I knew I did not even need to hear the speech. In this industry, you learn to read the room before you read the paperwork. Clara had been a friend of mine for 10 years, and if she could not look me in the eye, the decision had already been made. Of course, Bradley gave the speech anyway. He loved the sound of his own voice far too much to skip a performance, and he clearly wanted to practice his corporate jargon. After reviewing departmental efficiencies, he began, using a phrase he had definitely read on a business blog that morning. "We have concluded your role has become non-essential. We are streamlining legacy costs and bringing in fresh perspectives to modernize the logistics chain. We want to ensure that our operations are lean and agile for the next decade. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as Director of Systems Engineering." He actually smiled when he said it, like he had just solved world hunger instead of firing the man who kept this entire shipping operation from collapsing into a flaming heap of delayed deliveries and broken contracts. He thought he was the new broom sweeping the floor clean. He had no understanding of the delicate balance required to keep hundreds of trucks moving across the country in perfect synchronization. I did not flinch. There was no begging, no angry outburst, and no dramatic monologue. I just adjusted my collar, slid my company-issued laptop across the polished table like I was handing him a dead goldfish, and stood up. "Streamline this," I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for Clara to wince, and walked out with more grace than that boy would ever earn in his entire life. It is funny when you think about it. You work somewhere for 15 years, bleed into the cracks of its foundation, clean up its messes, and save its tail during every merger panic. You spend your weekends fixing server crashes and your holidays monitoring distribution channels. I had sacrificed family dinners, birthdays, and countless hours of sleep to ensure this company succeeded. Then, one kid with a brand new business degree and his father's password can erase your access before 9 in the morning. I walked back to my office, which was my former office now, and grabbed a cardboard box to pack my personal things. The office was quiet. Most of the staff had not even arrived yet, and those who had were staring at their computer screens, trying to look busy but failing to hide their curiosity. I packed up the photos of my dogs, a framed quote from my mother that said, "Do not get even, get everything," and a small flash drive taped under the bottom of my desk drawer with a label that read Clause 12C. That flash drive was the most valuable thing in the room, though Bradley had no idea it existed. It contained the original copy of my employment contract, complete with the custom addendum that had protected me for a decade. I did not cry. I did not swear. I just walked out through the same glass doors I had opened every morning for a decade and a half. But this time, I did not badge out. I paused at the front desk, looked at the receptionist with a calm smile, and told her she did not need to worry about disabling my network login just yet. She looked confused, but nodded. The boy thought he had cut the head off a relic. He had no idea he had just unplugged the power source of the entire company. The box of my desk items was still warm from the car ride home. It rattled softly as I set it down on my dining room table, right next to a half-dead orchid and an unopened bottle of red wine I had been saving for a celebration. Firing was not the celebration I had in mind, but it would have to do. I did not go for the wine, at least not yet. Instead, I crossed the living room to a tall wooden cabinet that nobody but me had opened in years. I slid the secret panel to the side, typed in a 6-digit code that had not changed in 15 years, and waited for the heavy mechanical click. The drawer inside groaned open. The documents inside were pristine, archived in plastic sleeves like sacred scrolls. I flipped past old tax documents, performance reviews from a former vice president who had actually wept when he got laid off, and a sealed blue envelope labeled Kingsley Original. Inside was the paper that changed everything. Back when this company was one bad quarter away from complete bankruptcy, I had not just stepped up. I had rebuilt their entire back-end logistics operation from scratch. I wrote the automation logic for their freight routing system in my own living room while eating cold takeout, dodging calls from creditors, and sleeping 3 hours a night. I had not asked for a bonus back then. I had asked for something much smarter. And Bradley's father, Charles Kingsley, the actual founder and chief executive officer of the company, had been smart enough to sign it. I looked at the document in my hands. Clause 12C was printed in clean black ink. It did not look like much on paper, just 3 paragraphs buried between arbitration procedures and standard non-disclosure agreements. But I remembered every single word of it. It was my insurance policy. It was the trapdoor I had built into the foundation of the house, waiting for the day they forgot who laid the bricks. I sat back in my chair, the contract lying open on the table before me, and let out a long, slow breath. The game was about to begin, and I had all the cards. I was ready to defend my work and make them understand that experience cannot be easily replaced by a young man with a fancy title and no practical knowledge. The terms of Clause 12C were written in precise legal language, the kind that makes regular people dizzy, but makes corporate lawyers break out in a cold sweat. There were 3 distinct parts to my little insurance policy. The first part stated that I retain the full intellectual property rights to any custom software or automated logic authored on my own personal equipment, even if it was utilized by the company. This was crucial because the entire Kingsley Freight Protocol, the core software that managed every single truck, route, and delivery in our entire network, had been written on my personal laptop in this very room. I had spent countless nights writing the optimization code, testing it, and implementing it. The company had a license to use it, but they did not own it. The second part was a written agreement that I was owed a 2.5% equity stake in the business, once total annual revenues crossed the $50 million threshold. A milestone we had crossed 3 years ago without me ever seeing a single penny of payout. Charles had always put me off, promising we would settle it during the next restructuring, and I had let it slide because I trusted him. We had built the company together, and I believed he would make it right. But his son's actions had shattered that trust completely. The third part of the clause was the real weapon. It was a specific clause stating that any restructuring decisions, including the elimination of my role or my termination, had to be approved by a unanimous vote of the board of directors, and that such an action would be null and void if my proprietary systems were still in active operational use by the company at the time of the decision. I sat down at my kitchen table, my phone in hand, and opened my document scanner application. I scanned the original contract, page by page, making sure the resolution was crystal clear. Then I scanned the system architecture documents for the Kingsley Freight Protocol. I also pulled up my personal repository and exported the watermarked code fragments showing the copyright tags embedded in the system. I merged all of these documents into a single password-protected file. One copy went to my personal email address for safekeeping. One copy went to my employment attorney, a sharp woman named Martha, who had helped me draft that very clause 15 years ago. We had sat in her small office in downtown Minneapolis, watching the rain beat against the glass, discussing how to protect my future. She had warned me that founders eventually get pushed out or get greedy, and that I needed an ironclad exit strategy. When she saw the attachment today, she replied within minutes with a single sentence. "They actually did it, didn't they? Get ready, because this is going to be a masterpiece. The final copy went to Eleanor Albright. Eleanor was a senior board member who had been with the company since its 7th year. She was a major investor who absolutely detested the nepotism Charles was starting to display. She had told me over dinner at a conference last year that if the family ever tried to turn on me, I should send her the paperwork and she would handle the knives. Well, the family had turned, and it was time to see if Eleanor kept her word. By the time the emails cleared my outbox, I was already drafting a detailed bullet point summary of the systems currently running on the Kingsley Freight Protocol. I knew they were still using it. They had tried to rename it Bradley Ops a year ago, plastering the boy's name all over the user interface. But you cannot change the engine of a car just by painting the hood. My fingerprints were all over the code, nested deep within the database queries and the routing algorithms. I closed my laptop, walked over to the dining room table, and finally opened that bottle of red wine. I poured myself half a glass, sat back, and watched the afternoon sun fade through the window. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt calm, the kind of calm that comes when you have spent years preparing for a storm, and the first raindrops finally hit the glass. I knew that without my daily maintenance, the system would begin to degrade. I had written the code to be incredibly efficient, but it required constant optimization to handle the real-time changes in shipping lanes, weather patterns, and fuel costs. Without me, the machine would run, but it would run hot, and eventually, it would start to smoke. The next morning, the office was quiet, or, rather, it was the kind of quiet that precedes a disaster. I was not there, of course, but my absence was already beginning to be felt. A logistics company is a delicate thing. It looks like a simple matter of moving boxes from point A to point B, but behind the scenes, it is a complex web of timing, balancing loads, and predicting traffic patterns. Without the constant manual tuning and code updates I performed daily, the system was bound to start showing its age. I spent my morning walking my dogs in the park, enjoying the crisp air and the complete lack of incoming emails. I knew my phone would start ringing eventually. I just had to wait for the first domino to fall. It did not take long for the cracking noises to start echoing through the company. The first reports of trouble started on Wednesday. A major freight shipment bound for Milwaukee simply vanished from the tracking dashboard. The client called 3 times, their logistics manager growing increasingly hostile with each call. They were one of our largest accounts, representing nearly 30% of our Midwestern shipping volume, and they were not used to being ignored. The shipment contained high-value automotive parts needed for an active assembly line, and every hour of delay cost them thousands of dollars in lost productivity. On Thursday, 2 high-value invoices went missing from the central database, leaving the billing department unable to process payments. This caused a chain reaction, delaying fuel payments for our independent drivers. By Friday afternoon, the system had experienced a major routing error, sending a massive shipment of heavy commercial vehicle batteries to a warehouse in Vermont instead of its actual destination in Virginia. The mistake was catastrophic. Under federal shipping regulations, transport of heavy commercial batteries requires specific hazardous material manifests and route clearance. Sending them to the wrong state without the proper paperwork exposed the company to thousands of dollars in potential federal fines from the Department of Transportation. It cost the company $6,000 in expedited shipping corrections alone, not to mention the damage to our reputation. The customer called Charles directly, screaming about incompetence and threatening to take their multi-million-dollar business to our chief competitor, Carrington Freight. These were the exact types of operational paper cuts that I had spent the last 15 years preventing. I was the one who quietly patched the bugs, cleared the database queues, and resolved the routing conflicts before anyone in the front office even realized there was a problem. I was the bridge between the complex technology and the real-world operations. Now that I was gone, the network was bleeding, and there was nobody around to stop the flow. Bradley had tried to solve the Milwaukee issue by shouting at the dispatchers, but screaming does not fix database corruption. He was completely out of his depth. Meanwhile, the internal communications channels were buzzing. In the break room and over private messaging channels, my name was being whispered. Employees were sharing rumors about the contract and the intellectual property rights. Did you hear about Dan's contract? One dispatcher typed in a private chat. Apparently, he owns the software we use to route the trucks. I heard Bradley fired him without even checking with the board, another replied. Legal is having a fit. The whole office is talking about it. Charles Kingsley returned to the office on Tuesday morning. He had been out for 2 weeks recovering from a serious stomach surgery, and he looked thin, pale, and exhausted. He was met at the elevator by his executive assistant, a stern woman named Rhonda, who had worked for him for 2 decades. She did not say good morning. She just handed him a thick manila folder and told him he was going to need a very strong cup of coffee. Inside folder was a copy of my scanned contract with Clause 12C highlighted in bright yellow marker. Beside it was a formal letter from my attorney, outlining the breach of contract, the unpaid equity stake, and the unauthorized use of my copyrighted software. Charles sank into his leather chair, his face turning pale. He did not call human resources. He did not call the legal department. He picked up his phone and dialed his son's extension. "Get in here right now," Charles said, his voice flat and dangerous. A minute later, Bradley strolled into the office, carrying a cup of tea and looking completely unbothered. "Hey, Dad, glad to see you back. We have been making some great progress on modernizing the team and cutting down on legacy costs." Charles did not answer. He just slid the manila folder across the desk. Bradley picked it up, flipped through the pages, and shrugged. "What is this?" he asked. "Some old paperwork from Dan? The guy is just bitter because I streamlined his role. It is a standard termination. He is bluffing. Ride Section 12, Paragraph C," Charles said, his hand trembling slightly. Bradley squinted at the page. "Okay, so it says something about board approval. So what?" "I am the acting director. I have the authority to make staffing changes. You do not have the authority to violate a board-mandated employment agreement," Charles roared, slamming his palm on the desk. "You fired the only man who understands how our shipping software works. And worse, you did it without consulting the board. Eleanor Albright has already called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning." "Do you have any idea what this contract means?" "It is just boomer legal jargon," Bradley muttered, though his swagger was starting to fade. "We can just pay him a small severance and make him sign a release. We cannot pay him off," Charles said, leaning forward. "Because according to this contract, he owns the intellectual property rights to the core logic of our system. If he pulls our license, we cannot route a single truck. We will be bankrupt in a month." "You did not just fire an employee, Bradley. You declared war on the wrong general. And you did it with a butter knife." By Wednesday afternoon, the panic had spread to the executive suite. Bradley tried to call my personal phone 3 times. I let every call go straight to my voicemail. He finally left a message, his voice sounding tight, high-pitched, and forced. "Hey, Dan, it is Bradley. I just wanted to reach out and see if we could sit down and chat. I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding last week, and I would love to clear the air. Give me a call back when you can. We can discuss a consulting agreement if you are interested." I did not call him back. Instead, I let my email autoresponder handle him. When he sent an urgent meeting request to my personal email, the automated reply sent him a cold message. "Thank you for your inquiry. I am currently unavailable. If this matter is urgent, please contact someone who did not deem my services non-essential." The rejection must have stung, because Bradley's next move was as desperate as it was foolish. He walked down to the engineering department and cornered Toby Jenkins. Toby was a 24-year-old junior systems analyst who had only been with the company for a year. He was a smart kid, but he was easily intimidated by authority. Bradley knew that Toby had worked closely with me on the database, and he hoped he could use the kid to find a quick fix. He wanted Toby to clean up the mess before the board meeting. Bradley stood over Toby's desk, demanding that he open the source code for the routing software. "I need you to go into the system files and remove all the copyright tags," Bradley ordered, keeping his voice low so the other developers would not hear. "Just search for Dan's name and delete it. We are updating the software version, and we need a clean slate." Toby looked at the screen, then looked back at Bradley, his eyes wide with concern. "Sir, I cannot do that. Those tags are hard-coded into the core database architecture. They are tied to the licensing verification subroutines. If I delete them, the system might lock itself down. The entire database is structured around those watermarks. Then bypass it, Bradley snapped, leaning in closer. You are a programmer, right? Figure it out. We will call it a system modernization. I will make sure you get a nice promotion and a bonus in your next check. Just get it done by tomorrow morning. I do not care what you have to rewrite. Toby was young, but he was not stupid. He knew that altering copyright notices on proprietary software without the author's consent was a direct violation of federal law, specifically Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. He also knew that Bradley was trying to cover up his own massive mistake by pushing a junior employee into committing fraud. Toby felt his heart pounding. He knew that if he complied, he could face personal legal liability. He had student loans, a new apartment, and a career to protect, and he was not about to throw it all away for Bradley's arrogance. Once Bradley walked away, Toby did the only sensible thing he could do. He took screenshots of the system logs showing the hard-coded copyright watermarks that read, Copyright D, Vance KFP Core Logic version 2.4. Do not modify without legal clearance. Then, he wrote a detailed memo describing Bradley's request, attached the screenshots, and sent it directly to the Chief Compliance Officer and the Head of Human Resources. By 5 o'clock that evening, Toby's memo had been forwarded to Eleanor Albright and the legal team. The situation had officially upgraded from a breach of contract dispute to an active liability crisis. Bradley had attempted to destroy evidence of intellectual property ownership and pressure a junior employee into committing corporate fraud. I received a copy of Toby's emails from a friendly source inside the compliance department. I smiled as I read it. Bradley was drowning, and instead of calling for help, he was trying to drink the water. I poured myself another glass of Merlot and waited for Charles to make his move. The trap was fully set, and Bradley had walked right into it. It was Thursday evening when Charles Kingsley showed up at my house. He did not come in his usual black luxury sedan. He drove his wife's compact SUV, hoping to keep his visit discreet. He looked 10 years older than he had when I saw him a month ago. He was dressed in casual slacks and a windbreaker, his posture slumped with defeat. I let him in, but I did not offer him a drink. We sat at my dining room table, where my legal files were neatly organized next to a framed photo of my dogs. I am not here to make excuses, Dan, Charles began, his voice barely above a whisper. Bradley made a catastrophic mistake. He is young, and he wanted to prove he could run the place without me. I should have kept a tighter leash on him. He is 28, Charles, I said, keeping my voice cold and even. He is old enough to know the law, and he is old enough to respect the people who built your company. He thought he could erase 15 years of work with a single email. I know, Charles sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. The board is meeting tomorrow morning. They are prepared to strip Bradley of his authority. We want to offer you your job back, Dan. We will give you a full reinstatement, 6 months of back pay as a signing bonus, and we will finally pay out the 2.5% equity stake you are owed. We will also sign a formal licensing agreement for the software under your terms. I looked at the folder Charles had slid across the table. It was a generous offer, but it was 15 years too late. It is a nice offer, Charles, I said, leaning back. But I am not signing it. Charles blinked, his eyes wide with panic. Why? We are giving you everything you wanted. You will have complete control over the systems department. We are meeting all your demands. We cannot survive without that software. Because I already had coffee with the chief technology officer at Carrington Freight this morning, I replied, watching his face closely. They have been trying to build their own routing software for 5 years without success. When I showed them the architecture of the Kingsley Freight Protocol, they offered to buy a permanent, exclusive license for the software. They also offered me a position as their senior vice president of logistics engineering, with a salary twice what you were paying me. You would sell to our biggest competitor? Charles asked, his voice shaking. You would destroy what we built? I did not destroy anything, Charles, I said. Your son did. I am just licensing my property to a company that actually knows its value. If I sign with them, Kingsley Freight will have 6 months to transition off my software before the license expires. Good luck rebuilding that system from scratch. The next morning, the board meeting was a slaughter. Bradley sat at the table, looking like a teenager who had been caught stealing his parents' car. He was sweating through his expensive designer shirt, his hands trembling as he stared at the polished mahogany table. Eleanor Albright led the meeting, presenting the documentation of Bradley's breach of contract, the copyright violations under Title 17, and Toby Jenkins' Mo regarding the attempted fraud. The board voted unanimously to terminate Bradley's employment with cause, stripping him of his title and his company assets. Charles sat in silence, unable to defend his son. The legal counsel advised the board that continuing to use the software without my license would result in a massive federal lawsuit under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, exposing them to millions of dollars in damages. When the legal counsel asked if there was any way to negotiate with me, Charles simply shook his head. "He is gone," Charles told the board, "and he is taking the software with him." I watched the news of Bradley's termination break on a local business website from my new office at Carrington Freight. My office here is on the top floor, with a view of the city skyline. I have a team of 10 engineers who actually listen to my advice, and my contract is secured by a legal team that does not make mistakes. They respect my experience and value my dedication, which is a welcome change from my time under Bradley's management. Sometimes, people think revenge is about screaming, fighting, and making a scene. But the best kind of revenge is quiet. It is the steady, unstoppable application of consequences to a person who thought they were above them. I took a sip of my fresh coffee, looked out at the city, and got back to work.